Chapter 9. Between the promise and the fulfillment. Between the promise and the fulfillment. Isaiah 55, verses 8 and 9. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. Isaiah chapter 55, verses 8 and 9. There are moments in life when you struggle to believe what God said, but you press on. These moments are the tension in the journey. The journey matters most to God, not necessarily the fulfillment of the promise, although that brings him glory. The journey is where the blood, sweat, and tears are spent. You might find yourself, as we did many times, praying desperate prayers, spending time in worship, seeking God, crying in confusion, and finally surrendering all you have left. But relentless with your cries of hope. Be relentless with your cries of hope. When you are so close to a breakthrough, something usually happens that will test you. It's a test of your faith and your obedience. The enemy wants us to question and doubt what God said. He wants us to second guess if we heard God right and to come into agreement with the liar's negativity. Maybe you are thinking, I've taken steps of obedience, but it didn't turn out how I thought it would. Does walking in obedience even make a difference? We walked through a season like that. We had many words from God declaring that we would have children. There was no denying what God had said. We stood by his word and continued to believe he would remain faithful in bringing it to pass. He had spoken and we had listened, so we decided to move forward. When you receive a word from God, whether through scripture, his still small voice, a prophetic word, a dream, or a picture in your mind that keeps coming up, God knows that you will need the reminder to keep going forward. He knows you will need the nourishment of his words to persevere. Be gripped by God's promises even more than the pain of your disappointment. Surrender control from Melody. Surrender control by Melody. After taking time to do some healing and processing after Cannon's loss in November 2022, we started the process of adoption. It had taken some time for us to pray and be open to it, but we felt God's call. If you had asked us a year or two before, we would have thought we would be pursuing it. We wouldn't have thought we would be pursuing adoption. But God changed our hearts. Once we took the step, we felt peace. We didn't know how our family would grow and how God would bring his word to pass. So we decided to lay all options down and surrender them to God. We knew our family would grow the way God wanted it to. We just had to be open to lay down our desires. After doing all the intense paperwork, home study, fingerprints, background check, making our profile book, sending applications to various attorneys and agencies, and paying multiple fees, we were finally active for domestic infant adoption at the end of January 2023. We had no idea what we were getting into. but we trusted God and laid down our preconceived notions of how it would happen. In February, we started getting cases brought to our attention. It seemed like a whirlwind sometimes. If you are unfamiliar with adoption, sometimes you only have 24 hours or less to decide on a case. That was hard for us. Each agency and attorney worked differently, so we went with a multifaceted approach to get more cases. Each agency had an at-risk fee. This meant that in infant adoption, there are many expenses the adoptive parents potentially pay for. Any of the following can be included in an at-risk fee: transportation, food, phone, living, pregnancy care, clothing, agency fees, state fees, and more. We were pursuing an infant adoption, preferably at birth, because we wanted to have that opportunity to bond right away. It was hard to say no to some circumstances, but if we didn't feel peace or good about it, we had to wait on God. There were many times we said yes, but the birth mom ended up picking another family. Those were challenging moments, but we were able to process them quickly and remain optimistic about the next one. In late June 2023, we got a call one day from an agency we had not gotten a case from yet. When we answered the phone, they told us that the birth mom had chosen us. The emotion that came was a different feeling, because in all the previous cases, we had to say if we wanted to be considered by a birth mom and her situation or not. This time, the birth mom had already picked us, so all that was on the line was our answer. They proceeded to tell us that this mother was going to be having her baby the very next week, and that we would need to fly down to Florida to meet her the day before her C-section. In short, we ended up saying yes hours later. It was a whirlwind. We were so excited. We were in the middle of finishing our new home, but that now went on the back burner. It was time to go meet our baby. We packed our bags as fast as we could with our hearts racing. We booked our flights and rental car, packed all the baby stuff, and headed out the next day. We told our families, who were joyful with us and held us in prayer and support. I remember thinking on the plane how much this trip would change our lives forever. As David and I gripped each other's hand on the plane, we prayed. I was nervous to meet the birth mom, but so excited to see her personality and give her our love, honor, and support. The next day, we were to have lunch with the adoption agent and the birth mom. We met at a restaurant of her choice and brought her a gift. When we walked in and sat down, we could tell she was extremely nervous and shy. We were anxious and excited. This young mom with no resources or support. We listened to her story as much as she would tell us and ask questions about her and what she liked. Trying to get to know someone in 2 hours is impossible for anyone, let alone in a situation as unique as this, with all of the emotions swirling. By the end of the conversation, we exchanged contact information to support her in any way she needed. We knew she could change her mind at any moment, but we held on to hope that this was the child that God would bring into our lives to raise and love. We left that lunch hopeful and excited for the baby that would be born the next day. We went to get a few essential items and some baby clothes. The next day, the birth mom would be going to the hospital. We had one day to prepare before the baby was born. I became overwhelmed with so many details to think about. I knew, however, that I had to be strong because we didn't know for sure what would happen. There had been no birth plan discussed, so we were left in limbo. Everything was out of our control. Relinquishing control is probably one of the hardest things for a human being. We wanted to know some kind of outcome so we could be prepared. It's in our human nature. In adoption, there typically is no room for that. You must choose to surrender and believe that God will be with you no matter the result. We prayed and worshiped as we prepared what we could. The next day, we waited to hear from the agency or the birth mom that the baby had been born. We did not know the gender, which would be a sweet surprise. Many hours passed, and still we had heard nothing. We began to get a little concerned and contacted our agent. She explained to us that the birth mom's C-section got delayed and happened later than expected. She was planning to be in the room with the birth mom, but she asked her to leave, so she didn't know any more than we did. That was nerve-wracking for me. A couple more hours later, we finally heard from the birth mom. She was recovering from surgery, and she said we could come to the hospital to meet the baby. We let our agent know, and she had us to go by ourselves to the hospital. It was such an interesting experience. Nothing was what I expected. As we entered the quiet and dim room, we congratulated her and brought her favorite yellow flowers. We saw a beautiful baby girl. She was so precious. She was perfect. We got to spend some time with her that night, holding her. And then eventually the birth mom asked us to leave and come back the next day so she can get some rest. We felt better after getting to meet our future daughter that night. We were excited and nervous at the same time. It would only be another day or so, we thought, that this birth mom would officially make her decision. Up to this point, she was choosing us to parent her child, and she had not changed her mind yet. The next day, our agent let us know that because of the C-section, they were letting her take another day before she had to make her decision and sign papers because of discharge timing. This extra day typically is not given in any particular state at the time of writing this book. Birth moms have 48 hours, and then they must either sign the papers or change their minds. Again, we waited and prayed. The wait felt like forever. We thanked God and asked Him to protect and be with us. We couldn't do anything because we needed to be ready to go to the hospital at any point. We sent her messages but heard nothing for almost the whole day until evening again. She explained later that she had friends and coworkers who were visiting. Again, it made me nervous that she was possibly changing her mind. If she was changing her mind, I wanted the bandage to be ripped off right away so we could go home and process it instead of being pulled along. But we had no hope. We held on to hope. And our agent reassured us her situation was not healthy for this child. So she didn't think she would change her mind. However, there was still a chance she would. The next morning came, and we got to go back briefly to see the baby. The hospital was small, and the rooms were intimate, so we never got complete private time with the baby when we visited, which was hard for all of us. I can't imagine the birth mom watching us smile and love on this baby. It must have been so hard as she battled with her decision. At the same time, we had given a lot just to be there. Time away from work, finances, and our hearts. Unfortunately, the story did not end as we had hoped. In the last hours, the birth mom changed her mind. I remember our agent crying with us as she felt so bad, but she was also concerned because she didn't know how this mother would raise her child. She didn't have support, money, baby clothes, baby supplies, or even a car seat. It was hard for us to swallow. We had vulnerably put our hearts out there and shared our story, only to be shut out. Let me take a moment to say this. In the realm of adoption, the decision a birth mom or birth parents make is incredibly hard and painful. It is hard for the adoptive parents as well. Many couples like ourselves had already experienced many losses or maybe never were able to get pregnant and ended up getting disappointed again. It's hard for everyone involved. There has to be so much grace, so much love, and so much honor. When a mother decides to parent her child, it's beautiful, and it is the original God-intended design. Yet, it is hard for adoptive parents who have waited for the child. The reality is that someone will end up giving up a child, and someone else will end up parenting that child. We had to walk away and fly home with empty arms. When we arrived home, we couldn't believe what had just happened. Our emotions and circumstances were in a tailspin in such a short time. Emotional Roller Coaster by Melody. We took a couple of weeks off before considering getting active with our agencies again. We wanted to take time to pray and process together. After those 2 weeks, we decided to get active, and at the end of July, we received another phone call. A birth mom has chosen you, the agent exclaimed over the phone. We were again shocked with potential excitement while guarding our hearts a little more. They gave us the entire day to decide. We read through the mother's information and talked to the consultant we were working with. She gave us her advice and opinion and thought it was low risk. We prayed and talked through it more together and felt nothing. We didn't feel peace about saying yes or no. It was an odd feeling. Typically, in our lives, we follow peace. This time, God seemed to watch how we would respond if He didn't give us direction. We decided to take the step of faith. This baby will not be born for 4 months, so it will give us more time to connect, support, and to get to know the birth mom and create a relationship. We met on Zoom the next week and met with this beautiful birth mom. She had a boyfriend, which made the situation a little more interesting, but he was all in with the adoption. In August, we flew to meet her and started developing a relationship with her. We would message back and forth and stay connected to our adoption agent to get updates when they were available. Things were going well, so we prepared a baby suitcase and made plans. Fast forward, it was now October, and it was getting close to the arrival time for the baby. We found out it was going to be a girl. The doctor had said they thought she might deliver early, so we got prepared. Then, in the middle of October, everything went silent. The birth mom stopped responding to us and the adoption agency. No answering calls, texts, or home visits. 2 weeks went by and nothing. Unfortunately, our agent had to drop the case and take us off for our sake. They never heard from her again, and neither did we. It was tough. Our emotions went wild as we felt used, lied to, and disappointed again. This time, we were unsure if we would get active again with our agencies. It felt too risky, hard, emotionally draining, and financially straining. We had already lost $30,000 from the last two failed adoptions, and our savings were drained. At this point, we were unsure how to move forward or if we should. No Second Class Miracles by David. It was breathtaking. I felt as if I was walking in a Garden of Eden. The colors were vibrant, the smells were magnificent. I was by myself, but the presence of the Holy Spirit was palpable. I felt peace and joy, and it was as if I could reach out and hold on to them. There were fruit trees with lush fruit, gardens and with delicious vegetables and flowers like I've never seen before. As I walked along the banks of a crisp, refreshing, clear river, I saw mountains in a distance. As my five senses were overwhelmed with goodness, I felt emotions too. I was filled with hope, a renewed hope that breakthroughs and blessings were coming. I was speechless, and I couldn't tell where I was exactly. Was I in heaven? Was it a national park of some sort? Just then, I felt the Holy Spirit nudge me to look up. As I did, I noticed I was approaching a tall and gorgeous garden trellis. As I walked under the arbor, I saw giant, beautiful iguanas hanging from their tails, and their heads were almost touching mine. They were vibrant and emerald green. There were countless iguanas as far as I could see. I'm not naturally a big reptile or lizard fan, but I didn't feel any fear or anxiousness at this moment. I felt awestruck by the beauty and filled with wonder. For the first time in a while, I felt that I was looking forward to the future again, and that the pain of the past had started to wither. As I looked again at all the iguanas, my alarm clock went off. It was a dream, but I immediately knew it was a dream from God. I felt peace and hope, like God was wrapping his enormous arms around me. So many elements of the dream were astounding, but the iguanas were the emphasis. I couldn't get the iguanas out of my head. We've learned so much since then, but I was not good at processing dreams with the Holy Spirit at the time. So naturally, I went to Google. I found lots of stuff, some good and some bad. But the thing that stuck out to me was fertility. Iguanas can symbolize fertility. So I filed it away as one more kiss from God amongst the others we received during the long and exhausting journey. In our experience, God often gives us words, encouragement, and dreams because he knows we will need them. The battle with infertility was getting long and daunting. We knew God was telling us to keep battling and fighting the good fight. But if we can be honest, for the sake of transparency, it was not always easy to keep our hopes up. We had some fantastic friends and family who encouraged us to keep going, and we also had some who felt a bit more like Job's friends. They doubted and undermined the prophetic in our lives, and they probably thought they were helping by sharing what they thought was the truth. In reality, though, their doubts and questioning did rub in a hurtful way. Not only did we have to hold onto hope for our dreams, but we felt we had to defend God, his words to us, and the fact that he would still work and through us supernaturally. The delay, disappointment, and the doubt were taking their toll. Forgiveness and grace are necessary, not just daily, for even the moment to moment. The delay, disappointment, and doubt were taking their toll. Forgiveness and grace are necessary, not just daily, but even moment by moment. Melody touched on this. We had to come to a place of complete surrender. We had to come to a place of total obedience. No matter how crazy or impossible it seemed, we even had to give up our preferences and our right to understand things in order to align ourselves with total surrender. As the disappointment, delay, and questioning began to set in again, we were at yet another crossroads. This one felt even more significant. We thought and believed that God would use natural health and wellness to bring about our miracle. We had learned so much and become so much healthier, which we will share in more detail in the next chapter. But we still hadn't had a healthy baby, much less the healthy babies that were promised. We thought God would give us a story and a ministry centered around supernatural healing. We thought he would use health and wellness as a career path because of the significant breakthroughs that were coming. That still might be true. I believe it is. However, at this point, in the fall and early winter of 2022, we felt the call to lay it all down. We had to lay our dreams and our ways of doing things on the altar. If only for a season, we had to give up our right to understand everything in order to get heaven's peace in our situation and home. For whatever reason, resorting to adoption or even more invasive medical procedures like IVF and IUI felt like a second-class miracle at the time. Part of us felt like we were giving up too soon, and the perception from the outside world was that once you begin the process of adoption, you've essentially resigned from the idea of having biological children. Let me take a moment to set the record straight for anyone who may be in the struggle and the questions. There are no second-class miracles. There are no second-class healings. God has, can, and still does use any means for his glory. That includes medical treatments, natural treatments, and supernatural healings. One does not necessarily glorify him more than the other, and one does not necessarily require more faith than the other. The absolute key is discerning where God is in all of it and learning to hear his voice. God wants our hearts and our surrender. We had and have preferences about how the miracle will come about. We tend to be more natural and holistic minded. We tend to press in and want to see more of the supernatural. All of that is awesome. There's nothing wrong with it. It becomes wrong when we worship the healing modality more than the healer. It's a heart issue that only we knew was going on. You can't see it from the outside necessarily. So, as God spoke to and molded us, we laid it all down. We reached that breaking point again where we came to the spot of total surrender. We felt God's stir leading us to adoption. We applied and got set up with agencies and home studies. We spent money, time, resources, and energy getting our story and our family out there to potential birth mamas who wanted to pursue this courageous option. Adoption for us was not and is not resignation. I still believe that we will have multiple biological children and potentially more adopted ones too. I so much believe that maybe by the time this book hits the shelves, there will be a need to be edits because our process will have become the suddenly we have been praying for and hoping for so long. A touch from heaven. From David's perspective, adoption for us was surrender. It was obedience. It was coming to a spot where we didn't care as much about how God would grow our family. We just trusted that he would. We realized our story and purpose weren't just about us, our kids, and our family. We learned that mamas and babies out there needed to see Jesus' love shine through us in some pretty complex and desperate situations. Adoption was turning our pain into purpose. It was a way to live out our pro-life beliefs. It's one thing to post on social media about how horrific adoption is. It's totally different to stand up and be part of the solution. Adoption is near and dear to God's heart, so much so that he uses the language of adoption for all of us as his sons and daughters. Now, it may be easy to assume that after this moment of surrender, things turned around for us. That's usually how the stories go, right? We had gone through so much hurt, pain, loss, and disappointment already. I know this act of surrender and obedience was a vital call and pivotal moment for us. But our reality didn't change immediately. Melody has already so elegantly shared the details of adoptions, interruptions. So I spare you from reading the same story twice. Since I want to add some details from my perspective that add to the confusion and chaos we were experiencing. During our trip down south to adopt, we thought to be our baby girl, we weren't allowed to be in the hospital very much. We wanted to be there loving on who we thought would be our daughter, bonding and loving on mama as much as possible. That's where our heart and passion were. But she wasn't our daughter yet, and we didn't have much to say. We were left waiting with minimal details. I remember our families and friends bombarding us with questions we couldn't answer. We weren't hiding anything. We simply didn't know many of the details. We like to find healing and recompense in nature. We spent what we thought would be our best moments as a family of two walking on the beach and exploring local, national, and state parks. It wasn't the stereotypical baby moon that people take nowadays, but we tried to make the most of it and get our minds off things as best as we could. I remember the moment like it was yesterday. It was another day in the blistering and humid heat. Our Minnesotan bodies couldn't handle much more. I turned the ignition off in the car and opened the door to explore a local park with Melody while we were hopeful for an invite to visit the hospital. I froze in my tracks. Although he wasn't, it was as if God was speaking audibly. There was a big, beautiful iguana in the parking lot just posing for me to see it. I realized that it wasn't just one, but that this park was almost overrun with them. And as we walked and prayed together, we saw families of iguanas at every turn. We felt God's peace as if I was back in the dream I dreamed earlier. I was so desperately needed that touch from heaven at that moment. Our God is so kind. Of course, I thought he would turn this specific situation around, but it was as if he didn't even need to. We knew then that God was in this adoption season no matter what happened. We had heard his voice. We were and we were obedient. Again, it was as if God knew what was about to happen to us. Adoption interruption. And he gave us this experience so we'll keep going. Of course, as you already read, this situation was another disappointment for us. We couldn't believe it. And we faced another shortly after in October of the same year. We were broken, scared, and reeling. Job's friends, if you will, started coming back. The questions didn't help. Is the adoption agency legit? Do you have enough money to keep going? Did you pray before you said yes? Are you sure you heard God? It was hard and disappointing again. I'm sure some of it was due to our past that we maybe hadn't fully dealt with yet. Old wounds and trauma resurfaced. I was taken back to the moment that I have had with God after the loss of our first daughter, Esther. That memory was all the way back in October of 2017. So 6 years had gone by, and there was still no healthy baby. I was processing the loss with the Holy Spirit on a walk in our woods. He spoke clearly at that moment and said, "I'm redeeming the month of October. I am redeeming the month of October. I am." That's great, God, I thought sarcastically. It sure doesn't feel like it. We've honored our babies in October for the last 6 years because October the 15th is International Pregnancy and Infant Loss Day. As I was lamenting and complaining to God, he spoke again. "Put on your purple jersey," he said. He went on to explain, and I am paraphrasing now, that the Vikings have hurt me time and time again. They've never made it to the promised land, which is the Super Bowl championship. Yet, every Sunday or Thursday, Monday or Saturday, I wear that purple jersey with renewed hope and passion. It's a silly example, I know, but realize that God speaks your language. It struck a chord with me. He was right. Why can't I get my hopes up for a team I have no control over that has never won anything? Yet, getting my hopes up for the family God promised Melody and me is hard. So, for what it's worth, when it felt hopeless and when we felt lost, I responded with a prophetic act. I went into my closet and put on the purple jersey. God ways, not ours, from Melody's perspective. God's ways, not ours, from Melody's perspective. We had to relinquish control of our circumstances. Surrendering is hard. It's messy, tiring, scary, and risky. However, it's necessary. When we look at all the times in our journey when we didn't know what to do, we always had to surrender. We had to let go of control of our story. We had to let it be what God wanted. We reminded ourselves of the words that God has spoken when you have a promise in your life, the enemy will always target what the Lord has spoken to you. There will be resistance from the enemy when the same word has been spoken over your life multiple times. I love Psalms 23:5, which says, "You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows." The Lord prepares a table for us with nourishment for the journey. There, we can recognize his presence in the darkest and deepest valleys. We can feast on God's presence instead of the enemy lies and negativity. Throughout our journey, we often thought we had finally figured out what was going on with our situation. The reality was that God had led us to some things to help us on our healing journey, but those were not the things that brought healing. God did and always does. We found ourselves glorifying things and people who didn't deserve it. This was done unintentionally, but we had to realize we were not giving God all the glory he deserved. No one deserves it more than God. We had to humble ourselves enough to know that we could not simply do it on our own or figure it out. It had to be God's heavenly solution. We had tried to do it our way. It was like preparing a cart for a horse and then realizing that was not the cart God was going to use. We had to let the cart go and ask him how he wanted to build it. At times in our adoption journey, we felt we clearly heard God, so we stepped forward and took some risks. We were disappointed, but we knew we had heard God. We just couldn't shake it. This wasn't the first time we had been discouraged or gone through a loss. We had to choose how we were going to respond. When humans and free will are involved, things may change, but God will always bring good out of it. He can use anyone and anything. Even when something is God's will, it may not happen like we thought it would because other people make different decisions. God can still use all of that. The truth about your situation might be you had peace. You heard from God clearly. You obeyed what God said. You loved and honored people well. You gave God glory. You still experienced disappointment and loss. We had done this in our 2 adoption failures. We put ourselves out there, exercised our faith, and sacrificed. We had received promises from God that we knew would be fulfilled one day, but we didn't know when. Through this, God was developing our character because he knew we were needed to handle his dreams and promises. It reminds me of the promises God gave Abram and Sarai before their names were changed to Abraham and Sarah. Abraham obeyed God and surrendered to his plan. God's will is perfect, and he never causes terrible or painful things to happen because it's not in his nature. But we have to realize we all have free will, which alters lives' outcomes. God has given us all free will to make our own decisions and choices. We can involve God or not. It's our choice. Everyone gets to choose whether to align with God's will or not. He never causes these painful things to happen, like loss, failure, or family splits. However, he will use it to direct us back to the path he designed for us. He is such a loving Father, always redeeming and giving grace. Of course, some situations are completely out of our control simply because we live in a fallen world. I want to honor that, as sometimes we experience things we didn't choose. Even in places in our lives where we experience negative things because of our choices, we can still give them to God, and he will bring beauty out of them if we let him. We often bring our plans to God and want him to pick one of them and sign off on it. This is not the way God works. His thoughts are not our thoughts, and his ways are not our ways. Isaiah 55 and verse 8. As we continue to lean in and become more like him, our ways become his. Radical Obedience by Melanie. I love the story of Jericho. I was reading about the radical obedience of Joshua and the Israelites had. God didn't ask for anyone's opinion on how to overtake Jericho, its king and its people. God asked them for their obedience, their unwavering obedience. God wanted them to march 6 days around the walls, and then on the 7th day to blow their trumpets with a great shout. The Israelites and Joshua took that first crazy step of obedience and faith. In the natural, this sounded absolutely wild. Who would do that for 6 days and continue to wait for God to move? Most people would have stopped after 1, 2, or even 3 days. Each day, they kept taking radical steps of unwavering obedience. What if they could have stopped? What if they could have decided to do it their way? Think of all they would have missed. They would have cheated themselves out of victorious from God. In this tension, God shows us where a measure of success is. It is being able to navigate outside of the promised land and in it. The Israelites had to experience this tension of the promise and the not yet. They had to keep trusting God will come through for them. I have to admit, it is sure hard to continue marching when we don't see God move the way we thought he would have. It's difficult to trust what he is doing behind the scenes. We must shift our perspective to what God is doing instead of what he is not doing. Choose to walk by faith and not by sight. Take God at his word and hold fiercely to his promises. God will bring victory at the right time. God did exactly for Joshua and the Israelites. Our victories never hinge on the ability of well thought out plans. They're dependent on unwavering obedience to God and trusting his plan. As spirit-filled believers who follow his voice, there is no limit to where God will lead us if we refuse to be hindered by our past. No matter the circumstances you were born into, God can bring you from the pasture to the palace. In the story of Jericho, God received all the glory because of their obedience and surrendering their plans. It became the highest form of worship for God. Authentic worship comes from surrender. Authentic worship comes from surrender. You have to go through hard things to understand the weightiness of worship. Radical obedience requires us to follow the rules of God's world. Emotions and prayer will not substitute for radical obedience. Emotions and prayer will not substitute for radical obedience. Our worship of God removes the obstacle of to our victory, but we still have to get our victory. Go get it. We still have to go get our victory. Worship sets the stage to move in more authority in your situation. When the Israelites learned in the wilderness, what the Israelites learned in the wilderness was no longer relevant to their new life in the promised land. The promised land represented grace. What you get by grace, sometimes you have to fight to keep in your life. The Israelites had to war for a land they did not build, but they had to obey God and watch how he would do it. The interesting thing about the Battle of Jericho is that they had the Ark of the Covenant with them. The Ark of the Covenant powerfully symbolizes faith and God's presence. The tablets of the Mosaic law, a pot of manna, and Aaron's rod were found inside the ark. This represented God's presence, provision, and approval. They were reminded of what God had brought them through. Previously, the ark of the Lord had been a crucial object in helping the Israelites pass over the Jordan River into the promised land. We must exercise surrender and obedience in the tension of our promise fulfillment. In order to lay down how we want the end result to look, we must let go. It's not forgetting, but letting go. You can let go of a loss in your life, but not forget it. It will always be a part of you, but it needs to be an offering of surrender. God requires us to lay down what we are going through to give us strength we need. In our weakness, God is strong. When we face not one but two failed adoptions, we remember how God had brought us through before, and that gave us strength for the days ahead. The tension was building, and at times it was uncomfortable, but we knew God would launch us into our breakthrough in His timing. Tension before breakthrough reminds me of a slingshot. When you put enough tension on the slingshot, it can catapult whatever you have further away than without it. Your tension will eventually push destiny to fulfillment in God's timing. There is always a giant standing in the gateway of your destiny. Obedience and surrender knock down the enemies. What are the walls of Jericho before you? Where do you need to exercise surrender and obedience in your life? For some things, God will perform for you. For others, your strategic participation is critical to fulfilling the promise. Today, I keep taking step after step of obedience. Do not give up. Keep pursuing. Keep declaring. Keep trusting. And keep hoping. Don't stop short of your victory with God. I know you feel tired and weary, but keep going. God will be your strength, because guess what? Generations depend on your ability to obey and surrender. It's crucial for those yet to be born.